We are coming off a wild week one of fantasy football, and obviously there's lots to learn about last week. There's always so much to learn about week one moving forward for week two. So after Monday Night Football, I always come out with a what I got right and what I got wrong video in which I do a live stream so you guys can chime in as well about what I got right and what I got wrong as well. So I publicly took some L's in that video, man. That's what I always like to do, is move forward with you guys with transparency here. And we will move forward in accordance with the new information we got in week one. So we are going to go ahead and get into the top 30 wide receiver rankings for week two fantasy football. Starting out with our first tier here of complete studs. Nobody should question why these guys are on this list this high. Obviously, Tyreek Hill at New England. This guy, I don't know if he could be stopped. I really don't know. I mean, what he did in week one was tremendous. I mean, he's on pace to get over 3,000 yards for the season. Obviously, that's probably not going to happen. We know the nature of Tyreek Hill. He's very boomer bust. These types of weeks happen for Tyreek Hill, but there's also weeks where he has like 5 points, 7 points for you. This is the nature of Tyreek Hill. He completely goes off, but honestly, he can literally do it against anybody. Any defense he can do it against. That's why I have him here at number one this week. And obviously the matchup is tougher this week than it was last week. This New England defense held A.J. Brown, for example, to under 80 yards in the game. So I think this matchup will be tougher for sure. But I do think that Tyreek Hill, I don't know if he can be stopped. I really don't. I'm interested to hear what you guys' thoughts in the comments are about me putting him in front of number two, which is Justin Jefferson, taking on the Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia this week. So when you look at what he did week one on the screen right now, I mean, he was the wide receiver 7 on the week with a 19.5 fantasy point game in half PPR scoring. That's nuts. But the reality is, even when he's down, he's great. And the other part of the reality is that guys like Jacoby Myers and Kendrick Bourne, who were both top 5 receivers in fantasy this past week, they're not going to repeat. Jacoby Myers isn't even going to play in week 2. So they're not going to repeat what they did. Things are going to start to even out as we get through the season. And week 2, things will start to even out themselves. Justin Jefferson's still a great option in fantasy, obviously. Don't get fooled by the wide receiver 7 finish in fantasy last week. And at number 3, some people may understand why I have him here, or why maybe they have questions about this one. I've got A.J. Brown, Minnesota Vikings, at home on Thursday night. So obviously last week, if you've been paying attention to my videos and watching my videos last week, I said that A.J. Brown was going to have a down week, and he did. He had a good game still. Like, from a fantasy football perspective, it wasn't bad. Still flex worthy for sure. He didn't kill you, but he definitely wasn't his normal great self with all the big plays that he can get. 11.4 points in week 2. Wide receiver 23 on the week. So it's not like he was great, but it's not like he was terribly bad. This is a much better matchup right here. This is fantastic as far as the matchup goes. Taking on the Minnesota Vikings at home on Thursday night is going to serve A.J. Brown very well in this matchup right here. The 10 targets that he got in week 1 are still a very important metric to get right here. With the top tier matchup they have this week, I love A.J. Brown. I think he's going to pop off in week 2 fantasy football. So moving down to our next tier right here, we've got Stefon Diggs to start out the game, taking on Las Vegas at home. Obviously coming off a really embarrassing loss. Like, that's the thing about the loss that the Bills just occurred to the New York Jets. Like, they were without Aaron Rodgers. It was an embarrassing way to lose that game. But this is a situation where Stefon Diggs was great. In fantasy football, he was great. Obviously, we know he's a target hog in this offense. We know he has the touchdown ability because he has plenty of targets on his side. Las Vegas, their defense is going to be much easier of a matchup for Stefon Diggs than going up against the New York Jets. So I really like Stefon Diggs this week in week 1. Every week is good for Stefon Diggs, but especially this week, I think he's going to be a target hog once again, and he's going to come down with another touchdown this week against a much lesser defense right here. Number 5, Calvin Ridley. I've got Calvin Ridley here at top 5, taking on the Kansas City Chiefs at home. So I got to get this out of the way right now. If you did not watch my lessons learned live stream that I did on Monday night after the Monday night game, then you missed me saying this, so I will come out and publicly say it. I was wrong about Calvin Ridley. I was absolutely wrong about him. I publicly took my L on this one in that live stream on Monday night, but I'll reiterate it again. I was definitely wrong. He was tremendous in week 1. He was the clear wide receiver 1 in that week, absolutely. There was no questions. It wasn't close between him and Christian Kirk. So you will not see Christian Kirk on this list right here. Calvin Ridley is the wide receiver 1 in this offense. Now, I still have my issues with how he's going to hold up long-term in this offense just because of the missed time, but there's no question that his performance was very, very good. Matchup versus Kansas City is very, very good as well. This is going to be a point-heavy game, and I think that Jacksonville is going to look to Calvin Ridley a lot in week 2. He looks like a top 5 to 10 fantasy wide receiver, and I'm always willing to admit when I'm wrong. And I was wrong here about Calvin Ridley, guys. So moving on to 6, I've got Devonta Smith taking on the Minnesota Vikings at home on Thursday night. Again, great matchup here, just like A.J. Brown. And he was just as involved as A.J. Brown was in week 1. He also had 10 targets, but he had the better fantasy week because of that touchdown that he scored. Obviously, like I just said, the matchup is great here. I'm expecting Devonta Smith to have another great game in fantasy football, probably better than last week. And I am totally in on Philadelphia wide receivers in week 2 in this matchup. Now I've got Jamar Chase at number 7 here, taking on the Baltimore Ravens in Cincinnati. Obviously, week 1 sucked for every single Cincinnati Bengal. No Bengals player got off out of that game and was like, oh, this was a good fantasy week this week for them. None of them had good fantasy weeks. You see Jamar Chase, he came down with 39 total yards. 6.6 total fantasy points. Just simply not a good week. But he still had 9 targets in this offense, though. Cincinnati's going to be fine, guys. This is the 3rd year straight that Cincinnati has started out slow. And the reason why is because Joe Burrow has also missed the last 3 off seasons. As the time gets closer, Joe Burrow has always missed time. 2021, it was because of the ACL injury he was recovering from. 2022, appendicitis right in the middle of the offseason as soon as they were preparing. This season, obviously the calf injury sidelined him for the majority of the preparation of the 2023 season. But this team is going to get incrementally better as the season goes on. They're taking on another tough divisional opponent this week, but this time it's at home. And Jamar Chase historically has done very, very well against the Baltimore Ravens in the past. So I think he's going to have a bounce back week and be just fine for you in fantasy this week. Now moving down to number 8, I've got Amon-Ra St. Brown taking on the Seattle Seahawks, who just got totally destroyed by the Los Angeles Rams, man. So obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown, he was a top-tier fantasy wide receiver in week 1. That's exactly how I predicted it, and he proved everything that we already knew, that he's a target hog in the Detroit Lions offense. There's no question about that, man. So Seattle, like I said, they just got abused by the Los Angeles Rams. They are a very low morale team coming into week 2. I think they'll be better in week 2, but Detroit's got the upper hand because they have way more time to prepare for this game since they haven't played since Thursday night. Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to take advantage of that, and he's going to take advantage of this matchup specifically. I like Amon-Ra St. Brown as a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy this week. Number 9, I've got Devontae Adams taking on the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo this week. So this was a lower week, obviously, for Devontae Adams in fantasy football. It wasn't his best week at all. But the one thing that you need to know here, and this is why he was on my buy low target video in fantasy football for week 2, he had a 34% target share in week 2. Still outrageously important to this offense. His importance is simply just not going away. He's going to be totally fine. These are types of games that every great player has. He just wasn't excellent, but he wasn't terrible for you. The matchup is not as bad this week. He's got no Pat Surtain to go up against with Buffalo, and Buffalo really did not look that promising defensively on Monday night against a very, very inferior quarterback with Zach Wilson. There's likely going to be no Jacoby Myers this week either. He's in the concussion protocol. He's expected to miss this game as well. Keenan Allen, number 10, taking on the Tennessee Titans in Tennessee. The good thing about Keenan Allen, and I've said this for years, and really, this is not a secret to anybody. You know exactly what you're going to get with Keenan Allen. He's the consistent number 1 target in Los Angeles' offense. This guy had 9 targets in week 1 in a very high-flying game, and Tennessee cannot defend the pass. They couldn't defend it last year. They can't defend it this year. They got really, really hammered on by a much less New Orleans offense in week 1. This is a bottom 5 defense in passing yards allowed, and they were exactly that in week 1. Los Angeles' offense is much better than the New Orleans Saints. I think Keenan Allen has a better week this week, and he possibly scores a touchdown in this game. Number 11, I've got Chris Olave taking on the Carolina Panthers. So he's down a little bit in my rankings this week, but it's not because he was not good. I mean, this guy did not disappoint in week 1. 110 plus yards in week 1. This guy was a stud. The touchdowns are going to come. Obviously, he didn't score a touchdown. That's what people are a little bit irritated about. This guy's going to be just fine, man. He could absolutely get a touchdown this week versus Carolina, who is a very unstable and really just directionless team right now. They're rebuilding, and it's showing. Atlanta doesn't throw either, so it's hard to get a really good gauge on how Carolina's defense is at defending the pass, since Atlanta only threw 18 passes in week 1 against Carolina. I think Olave is going to be great this week. I think this is just going to be par for the course for Chris Olave basically the entire season in fantasy football in 2023. CeeDee Lamb, number 12, taking on the New York Jets in Dallas this week. This was sort of a disappointing stat line. Obviously, when you looked at CeeDee Lamb and the fantasy output he gave you for week 1, it wasn't as good as I thought for sure, and it wasn't as good as probably many of you thought it would be. He caught all 4 of its targets for 77 yards. Now, this would have been a better stat line. Let's get it out there. It would have been better if the New York Giants weren't like little children out there playing the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, it looked like a bunch of 5th grade kids playing a varsity team. It was embarrassing. The New York Giants were totally humiliated at home versus the Dallas Cowboys. I'm not worried about CeeDee Lamb. He's going to see much more competitive games this year, and I think this week is going to specifically be a much more competitive matchup. Even though Aaron Rodgers is out, I do think that this New York Jets defense is going to give the Dallas Cowboys trouble offensively, certainly more than the Giants defense did, which is good and bad, of course. Good because Dallas is going to need to throw the ball more. Bad because CeeDee Lamb is going to have to deal with a guy like Sauce Gardner this week. But CeeDee Lamb is still elite. He's going to be totally fine this season. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we've got Brandon Ayuk here at number 13, taking on the Los Angeles Rams in Los Angeles this week. How about Brandon Ayuk, man? What a week Brandon Ayuk had. Caught all 8 targets, had over 120 yards in receiving, and had 2 touchdowns in fantasy football for a fantastic wide receiver 2 finish in fantasy football this week. I watched this game live. Let me tell you something. As great as Brandon Ayuk was, and he was very dominant, Pittsburgh didn't even bother covering. I watched it live. Believe me. Pittsburgh literally was just leaving Brandon Ayuk wide open. Like every time he caught the ball, he was wide open with nobody even around him. I don't think he's going to get that kind of treatment in week 2. I think teams are going to look at this and say, Brandon Ayuk is actually the best wide receiver in this offense. Los Angeles, their defense suffocated the Seattle Seahawks offense in week 1. So I think this is going to be a tougher matchup for them than Pittsburgh was in week 1. And I still think that Brandon Ayuk, just because he's the wide receiver 1 in this offense, will still have a good week. But Brandon Ayuk, man, how about that? Can we get a round of applause for what Brandon Ayuk did in week 1? Now, dropping down to 14, I've got Amari Cooper taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers on Monday night in Pittsburgh right here. Now, it was a disappointing outcome for Amari Cooper in fantasy football in week 1. Home Amari Cooper disappointed for you. He was definitely not efficient. He had 6 targets, only caught 3 of those balls right here. Pittsburgh might be the perfect remedy for a guy like Amari Cooper this week. Ayuk, like I just got done saying, he caught all 8 of his targets because they were leaving him wide freaking open on every single play. That's probably not going to happen for Amari. They know the importance that he has to this offense, so I don't think that he's going to be wide open and just left uncovered the whole time. But Amari Cooper is absolutely going to take advantage of this matchup against a 33-year-old Patrick Peterson, who I had said all offseason was not a good offseason signing for the Pittsburgh Steelers. You can clearly see that Pittsburgh is going to struggle against the pass in 2023. Now at number 15, I've got Jalen Waddle taking on the New England Patriots in New England this week. So Waddle was a little bit lower than expected in week 1. His fantasy output, it wasn't bad or anything, but it wasn't exactly great and what I was hoping for that he would do in the super high-flying matchup. The reality here with him, as you can see on the screen, this is not like an anomaly. Like, he's not a target guy. That's Jalen Waddle's reality. He's a big play threat, which means that he's going to give you a lot of boomer bust games throughout a particular season. But I can't put Jalen Waddle outside of my top 15 just because he's on this tremendous offense and he has the potential to get to a 30-point week. I'm not putting Jalen Waddle outside my top 15. Start Jalen Waddle with complete confidence moving forward. 16, I've got Mike Evans taking on the Chicago Bears at home in Tampa Bay. Now, I said it leading up to the week. I said it all week. I think that this was a good matchup for Mike Evans in week 1, and it showed. Mike Evans was very, very good in week 1. Baker Mayfield's strengths align with who Mike Evans is as a player. Baker Mayfield's one strength he's got a good deep ball. Mike Evans is very, very good at deep balls as well. The matchup is basically this week just as good for a wide receiver as it was against week 1 versus Minnesota. Chicago's defense, they're not stopping the pass either. He may not get another touchdown this week, but I think that 10 targets is absolutely in the cards if he does play this week. Now, number 17, I've got Michael Pittman taking on the Houston Texans in Houston this week. So let me talk about Michael Pittman for a second right here. Michael Pittman is a legit starting option in fantasy football for the rest of 2023. At the wide receiver position, I think that Michael Pittman is going to be a very good starting option moving forward. And I do not think that what we saw in week 1 was some sort of fluke. I really, really don't. This offense looked so much better and so much more efficient in week 1 than they did all of last season. Now, scoring 2 touchdowns is probably not going to be happening every single week for Michael Pittman. I'm not predicting that. But 11 targets is totally on the table for Michael Pittman given week to week. He's clearly the wide receiver 1 in this offense. I'm buying Indianapolis stock this week. On my buy low targets video, I said that Anthony Richardson was a great trade target. I debated putting Michael Pittman on that list as well, but I think because of the week that he had, he's not going to be a trade low guy. But Michael Pittman, honestly, man, I think that this is going to be a very good year for Michael Pittman, possibly his best year of his career. And the matchup this week against Indianapolis, it doesn't scare me. Totally in on you starting Michael Pittman with full confidence in week 2. Dropping down to 18, I've got DeAndre Hopkins taking on the Los Angeles Chargers in Tennessee. So here's what we need to remember with DeAndre Hopkins. Let's put some things out there. In a poor offense with a really bad quarterback, who, by the way, Ryan Tannehill looked terrible in week 1. He was abysmal in week 1. DeAndre Hopkins was still a top fantasy football wide receiver option. He had 13 targets, and that's the real draw. It always is the real draw with DeAndre Hopkins. He's not as explosive as he once was, and he was never a super explosive player, but DeAndre Hopkins catches the ball. And 13 targets is really important to note in fantasy football. And the matchup this week is a lot easier taking on the Los Angeles Chargers than it was in week 1, where he had to go up against Marshawn Lattimore. I think DeAndre Hopkins is going to be a very steady Eddie type of player for you in fantasy football that you can consistently count on starting week to week because his target share is so freaking high in this offense. Dropping down to 19, I've got T. Higgins, Mr. Goose Egg, taking on the Baltimore Ravens at home. Obviously, like I said, I know week 1 sucked. Week 1 sucked for every single Bengal, as we discussed earlier. And a massive goose egg from a player that you drafted pretty highly is going to keep you up at night. There's no way around this type of situation. What's important to remember here is that T. Higgins still had 8 targets in this game. So it's not like he was literally just flat out ignored in this offense. That's not what happened. This offense was just a bad game. It was just a really bad game for this offense, man. And Burrow, like I said earlier, he missed basically all offseason. This is a situation where this team is going to get incrementally better throughout the season as the season goes along. I don't think that T. Higgins is going to goose again. He's going to be fine. I'm not worried about T. Higgins season long either, but I think he'll be a bounce back player in week 2. DK Metcalf, number 20 here, taking on the Detroit Lions in Detroit this week. This might sound a little bit low for DK Metcalf. He led the big 3 wide receivers in Seattle in targets this past week. Between him, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith-Njigba. He had a touchdown in week 1, but that touchdown really saved his week. Like, other than that, if he didn't score that touchdown, he would not have been a good fantasy football option this week. He was very inefficient besides that. And this offense, like I've been saying all offseason long and leading into the season, this offense is going to lean towards more of Jackson Smith-Njigba as the season goes along. And Detroit is not an easy matchup. This is a changed team this year. DK is fine, but he's not a must-start for week 2 for me personally. Dropping down to 21, a surprise name on here, it's Zay Flowers, taking on the Cincinnati Bengals in Cincinnati. I also took a public L on Zay Flowers in that Monday night live stream that I did. I had to take the L here. He was the clear wide receiver 1 in this offense. 10 targets in this offense, 78 yards, 13.2 fantasy points, and he had a 48% target share. Unbelievable. Now, that number is not going to be the same once Mark Andrews comes back. There's simply no way that number is going to retain that high of a value for Zay Flowers moving forward with Mark Andrews. But he is going to continue to be the clear wide receiver 1 in this offense because he was very efficient with the work he got, and he looked very, very good when he was getting the ball in his hands. Still don't love Baltimore wide receivers week to week. I'm not going to say that Zay Flowers is a week-to-week start, but Cincinnati's matchup is a very favorable one. And I think that Zay Flowers has real upside moving forward, especially with a crippled run game. So dropping down to 22, unfortunately, it's Garrett Wilson taking on the Dallas Cowboys in Dallas this week. This one's pretty devastating to me. Garrett Wilson's situation, it's unfortunate. I'm filming this after the Monday Night Football game, and Rodgers is feared to have a torn Achilles. This is a big deal, and it's brutal for Garrett Wilson in particular. This offense is in shambles now with Zach Wilson. And I know that the Jets won that game. But if you watched that game, you saw that their offense was not the reason they won. The Buffalo Bills were the reason they won that game on Monday night. This is a bad situation for Garrett Wilson, and while I do believe that he will have 30% target share by the end of the season, and obviously he's still a great player, this is a massive deal for Wilson. And this has dropped him into a range where I no longer consider him a must-start every week. Unfortunately, as high as you drafted him, you're probably going to start him a lot of weeks, but he's in flex territory for me based on his actual fantasy performance that I think we're going to see week to week for him, especially in a tough matchup against Dallas this week. 23, I've got Jahan Dotson taking on the Denver Broncos in Denver this week. Week 1 was disappointing considering the matchup hype, considering the preseason hype. Jahan Dotson disappointed in week 1. But what's important to remember here, he still led the wide receivers on Washington in targets, 7 targets in that week 1 game. Was still a better option in fantasy football than Terry McLaurin. I think it will continue to be the wide receiver 1 in Washington, especially since Terry McLaurin is going to play, but he's still dealing with an injury here. It's going to be a tougher matchup, though, against Denver and Pat Surtain. But Jahan Dotson, I think, is consistently going to be in flex territory basically throughout the rest of the season here. Dropping down to 24, I've got Jerry Jeudy taking on the Washington Commanders in that same matchup here at home in Denver. So obviously, this one is totally contingent on if he plays. Obviously, if he doesn't play, you don't play him. But this is a situation where I like his chances because he was practicing last week and was really a 50-50 call leading into the weekend here. So if he plays, like I said, he's the wide receiver 1 in this offense. Denver needs him in this offense, man. When he gets back out there, he's going to be a 7 to 10 target type of guy. Don't worry about Jerry Jeudy when he's on the field. Worry about Jerry Jeudy and when he gets back on the field. I think it could be as soon as this week, but I think that Jerry Jeudy definitely has upside when he comes back. 25, I've got Christian Watson taking on the Atlanta Falcons in Atlanta. Same situation. Very contingent on if he plays. While Green Bay blew out Chicago in week 1, there was a clear big play threat missing in this offense. Green Bay missed the big play ability at the wide receiver position, in particular in week 1. Now, Aaron Jones obviously still hit on some big plays in week 1 versus Chicago. But the problem with him, he's also injured as well. So Aaron Jones may or may not go this week. I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know this. Christian Watson is going to be the best wide receiver and the wide receiver 1 in this offense when he gets back because Romeo Doubs is not a comfortable wide receiver 1. He's not comfortable in that position. Yes, 2 touchdowns saved his week this week, but other than that, when you look at his stat line, this is not a real wide receiver 1. This team needs Christian Watson's big playability, and the Atlanta matchup isn't terrible this week, so I like Christian Watson if he plays this week. Deebo Samuel is number 26, taking on the Rams in Los Angeles right here. I said it earlier with Brandon Ayuk. I think that Deebo Samuel is the wide receiver 2 in this offense. I really do think so. I think Brandon Ayuk is the better player at this point in time. Now, Deebo Samuel wasn't bad in fantasy football for week 1. It wasn't like he was this bad option that killed you this past week. That's not the case at all. Nobody on San Francisco was bad. I mean, really, like, everybody in San Francisco, aside from George Kittle, had a great week. But the matchup here is definitely tougher. And Deebo Samuel is going to be in flex territory. I just don't think that he's a guarantee to start week to week as a wide receiver for now at least. 27, I've got DJ Moore taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here. I understand that people are concerned with DJ Moore this week as well. These concerns are very warranted as well. He only had 2 targets, although he caught both of them. It was very, very disappointing from a volume perspective what came DJ Moore's way in week 1. But he looked really good on those limited opportunities. That's what you need to hang your hat on, is what he did with those 2 opportunities. What I believe here is that the Chicago Bears, they understand that a lot of jobs are on the line in their particular building this year. So I think they're going to look at this week 1 footage and realize they did not get DJ Moore involved enough in this particular matchup, and they will change that moving forward. And honestly, I considered putting him in my buy low trade targets video this week. It was a very close call, but it's to show you that I am still in on DJ Moore, and I think you should be too. Maybe just not the best week this week against Tampa Bay, but I do think that DJ Moore has better days ahead of him. Mike Williams at 28, taking on the Tennessee Titans in Tennessee. Obviously, another very disappointing week in week 1. Mike Williams actually missed some of that game due to going out of the game with the injury. But even when he was in, he didn't even do much in the game. But the reality is, this is who he is, guys. This is a true definition of a boom or bust wide receiver. This is totally who he is. He is rarely in between a boom or bust guy. He either gets you 25 points or he gets you like 1 or 2 points. Very rarely does he get you like a 10-point game, an 8-point game, a 12-point game. That's not who Mike Williams is. But Tennessee, they are a top-tier matchup though. This cannot be understated. Tennessee cannot defend the pass. So just based on pure matchup alone, Mike Williams has to be on this list for taking the matchup shot down here at number 28. Number 29, I've got Chris Godwin taking on the Chicago Bears at home in Tampa Bay. I don't love Chris Godwin. I've been saying it all offseason. I like him as a player, and I think he's had very good seasons, but I don't think this is going to be a great season for him. And I think the upside is very low with Baker Mayfield. And the week 1 stat line he put out, I think it's going to be a very familiar stat line. We'll see a lot from him in 2023. The matchup here, the reason he's on this list, is good against the Chicago Bears. He could absolutely have some big play opportunities. And then number 30, we've got Nico Collins making an appearance here, taking on the Indianapolis Colts. Nico Collins earned his spot here on the top 30 list in week 1. Week 1, he proved that he was a wide receiver 1 in this offense. 11 targets, 80 yards, 11 fantasy points in half PPR. Nico Collins is the clear wide receiver 1 in this offense. And Houston, a lot of this season, especially this week against the Colts, where I think that the Colts actually are going to win this game pretty easily, I think that Houston's going to be in a lot of negative game script where they're going to have to throw the ball. And Nico Collins is going to be the one who benefits directly from that. So let me know what you think of the list in the comments below and what guys you like or don't like in this particular week of fantasy football. And if you want to see the top waiver wire ads before your waivers process tomorrow, click on this video right here.